The last time I checked, there were about 1 billion English translations of the Bible out there, which seems like a bit of an exaggeration, but I legitimately feel like there's that many. There's just so many names and abbreviations, and people just refer to them by, these 3 letters, and I think it just gets really confusing. Why are there so many Bible translations even in the first place? And what's the difference between them? When we approach a Bible study, the best tool that we have at our disposal is our English translation. If we can't get into the original text, then we have to depend on a translation. So knowing which one's the best one for Bible study and for personal reading is really important. So I want to break down today what the difference is between all the translations and how you can pick a great translation of the Bible. So we're talking translations on Bootleg Bible College today. I did want to mention one resource that I'm going to be going through quite a bit in this Bible study, which is How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart. This is an incredible book. I'll link it in the show notes. I'm going to be referring to this quite a bit in this class. I'll just tell you that anything you ever see by Gordon Fee, just go ahead and pick up and read. It's going to be incredible. I've learned so much from him about exegesis, and he just is very, very good at what he does. And so I just highly encourage that. Before we get into the individual translations, the nuts and bolts of translations itself, I want to talk about sort of a philosophy of translation. You have to think about, we have a language barrier, right? The original texts were written in Greek and Hebrew. There's a significant language barrier, but we also have a culture barrier. We have like 2,000 years plus of culture differences between when the text was originally written and today. And so translators have developed different ways of translating in order to bring that original text into clarity for English readers. And so we get a big spectrum of different translation philosophies. Think about a phrase I just used earlier, the nuts and bolts. When I say that to you, you know what that means because you live in the same time period. That's a pretty common phrase. Now I want you to think about explaining that phrase to a 4-year-old. It's not so easy. My kids are constantly having me explain things like that to them. Like English idioms are just complicated. They're hard to explain. Now go back 2,000 years and explain that idiom to somebody who's doesn't even know what a nut or a bolt is. It gets really complicated, and so translators have to do the same thing when bringing Hebrew and Greek idiomatic language into English. When phrases like that come up, they have to determine what is the best way to translate this for modern English readers. And so the ideas, the philosophy behind how they translate those things are what give us such a vast spectrum of translations. And so I want to bring up a chart that I've put together for you that just kind of shows some of these differences and gives you an idea of the spectrum. So on the left side of this spectrum is formal equivalence. And formal equivalence is the translators trying to preserve the original words and grammar of the base text. So let's say we're in Greek. What the translator is going to do is going to try to stay as close to that Greek, translating everything exactly every single time in order to give you a sense of what the original text said. That may seem like the best translation off the top, right? I want to be as close to the original as possible. The problem is that 2,000 years of historical links to idiomatic language, to ways people think. Most of us do not know enough about Greek and about the ancient world in order to decide for ourselves exactly what the best way is to translate those things. We need help. And so a translation like the NASB, for instance, which is very on that formal equivalent side, or word for word, tends to be a very wooden text. It even if you go into the NASB and you look, there will be a lot of italicized words, and that signals that word had to be added for clarity in English, right? So the NASB in particular tends to be pretty wooden. It's very literal, but it also makes it hard to read. It's hard to just sort of straight read through the NASB because of how wooden it is. And you see text like the King James Version on that side of things. King James Version is an interesting one because so many modern English readers use it, but they speak modern English, and King James Version is not modern English. And so we're going to get into a little more King James Version when we get into the Greek basis of the New Testament in a further series. But you see some of these translations that tend to be a little more literal, a little more wooden on this side of the equation. And they try to stick a little more with the original text and the form of the original text. On the other side of the equation are thought for thought translations or free translations. And you see on the extreme side of that, a translation like the Message, which is trying to take all the thoughts and ideas behind the translation and bring them to modern English so modern readers can really understand it, which is an awesome endeavor and is really helpful for reading. I should note that the Message is actually a paraphrase, so it is using the English as its base and not a direct translation from the Greek. But this thought for thought mentality can be really helpful in just seeing the text in a new way, from a fresh set of eyes. The problem is you're getting a real interpretation of somebody else's idea of what the text says. So on text on this side of the equation, on the more free translation side, you're getting a lot more of the translator's insight into what the text is saying. Then you have functional equivalence sort of in the middle, which is in between this sort of word for word and thought for thought side, which is seeking to keep the original and bring it into modern English at the same time. So some of those idioms, some of those metaphors will be translated in such a way that a modern English reader can really easily understand what the author is saying without the literalness of the formal equivalence, but without the interpretation of the free. And so you can see this vast difference in all of these translations and this huge spectrum of translations and philosophy behind these different translations. So the question becomes, what translation should I be using for interpreting the Bible or reading the Bible? I think for me, let's start with reading the Bible, because Bible reading is something we should do on a regular basis, totally. And I think finding a good translation to read from is really important. I tend to stick in the middle there with the NIV. I'm kind of a nerd. I like the TNIV, which you can't really find online. You have to find it used in print. It's a nerdy thing, but that middle section there, even up to the HCSB, which is Holman Christian Standard Bible, and the newly released Christian Standard Bible, the CSB, those are good sort of middle of the roads translations that aren't too literal, but aren't too free in the way that they translate. But honestly, I really enjoy switching up my translations, especially if I'm reading the Psalms or some sort of poetry. The New Living Translation is my go-to because it does a really good job of putting that into actual poetic language. When you're in a little more wooden literal translation, it can be very awkward to read poetry because it just wasn't meant to be read like that. It was meant to be read in beautiful language. And so the NLT and more free translations are good for that. I think in the New Testament, especially in Paul's letters, more of these literal translations are really good for that, like the ESV. Reading Paul in the ESV, I think, is awesome because it really traces out the arguments Paul is making. It gives you an idea of the flow of his text. And so really there's no perfect translation for reading. And I think the more we can read in different translations, it's actually a lot better. You can use resources like Bible Gateway online or the Bible app on your phone that has just a ton of translations, and you can try different ones. Maybe read the same passage in a couple of different translations and see how you feel and what the differences are, and if they're more readable for you. It's finding something that works for you. When we come to Bible interpretation, though, that rule gets expanded because you cannot just use a single translation. When you're looking at the original text, when you're not able to look at the original text, you need as many resources in English as you possibly can. And so I would say you need to be in 5 to 8, maybe 10 different translations when you're doing Bible study. And that's especially where resources like Bible Gateway can come in handy. If you want to pay for resources, Accordance Bible software and Logos Bible software are really good for that, where they can put these all side by side so you can see all the differences. But especially when studying the Bible, there is no one translation you should be in. There's a lot of people that will say, hey, you need a more, a literal translation for that. Simply not true. You need to be all over this spectrum of different translations in order to understand the text behind it, because different translations will choose to sort of highlight and bring out different parts of the text, and they'll give you a more complete picture of what the text is actually saying. So I encourage you to invest in a few different Bibles. I just bought the Christian Standard Bible because it's a new translation. I want to try it out and check it out. There's usually paper copies of these Bibles that you can get really cheap. May not be as usable for like reading through, but they're super helpful for just having the text there. So I encourage you to try something new. Try a different text, read a different Bible, look into something new. And I think it's really going to surprise you how much difference is brought out by using just different translations in different texts. So go check out a new translation, go find something new, and let's study the Bible together. So obviously this isn't really a deep dive into translations. This is the flyover version. There's a lot more things that go into picking a translation, such as how that translation handles gender. That's one thing I really like about the TNIV and why I still use it, is because I like how they handled, not just brothers when addressing a crowd, but brothers and sisters, something like that. The gender neutral language is really helpful, especially for preaching, when I'm preaching to both men and women. I want to be inclusive of that and understand what the language was trying to say, because a literal translation, I think, is not the best in those cases. So there you have it. There's a lot more to that. If you're interested in kind of delving deeper into some of this stuff and asking questions, on Patreon, my highest level gets you access to a one-on-one sort of question and answer time with me about some of this stuff, where we just deep dive. And so if you have some of these questions, I'd love to talk to you about them, kind of explain, maybe delve a little deeper into them. So go check it out on Patreon. You can find links in the show notes on my website. You can also, if you're interested in this Bible translation chart I put together, if you sign up for my mailing list, I'll give you a direct download of that, so you can just keep it around, reference it when you need to remember what the different Bible translations are. I want to equip you to know about your Bible translations. So yeah, sign up for my email list on my website. It's really easy. I don't actually send that many emails. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel just so you know when new episodes come out. Check out A Theology of Hustle, which is a great podcast over there talking about work and faith. And yeah, we'll see you next time on Bootleg Bible College.